All right, so the Gambia is heading towards its 2026 election. And there's this huge question just lingering, right? Is it possible for the politics to finally move past all the division and actually focus on what matters to people every single day? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dig into. We'll look at the data, what this division is costing everyone, and if there's a real path for change.
And this quote from journalist Keba Jafang, man, it just cuts right to the chase. It's such a powerful reminder, you know? A candidate's ethnicity isn't going to magically fix the national debt, and their personality, no matter how charming, won't make a bag of rice any cheaper. This really sets the stage for everything we're talking about today. What are the real problems? And more importantly, who has a real plan to solve them?
So let's talk about the elephant in the room. What's been holding things back? It really boils down to this political game, this culture of division. And look, it's not just the politicians pointing fingers at each other. It's a whole cycle where the media, and yeah, even us, the voters, get pulled into these distractions. And all that noise just keeps us from focusing on the challenges that are right in front of us. And hey, this isn't just some vague feeling or an opinion, okay? There is cold, hard data to back all of this up. So let's dive into the evidence and see just how damaging this political style has actually become. There's actually a name for this, coined by the media monitoring group Malagen. They call it information disorder. And what does that mean? Well, it's basically a situation where the whole political debate is just consumed by hate speech, by disinformation, by personal attacks, and any real talk about policy gets completely drowned out. And this isn't a new thing either. This was their #1 finding after they monitored the entire 2021 to 2023 election cycle. And when you actually look at what fuels this hate speech, it's pretty alarming. Just look at this breakdown. A staggering 62.5%, nearly 2/3 of all the incidents they tracked were based on ethnicity. It's so clear what's happening here, right? Tribe is being used as the main weapon to divide people and distract from absolutely everything else. And listen, this isn't coming from some small fringe groups on the sidelines. The Malajan report points the finger directly at the country's biggest political parties. They found the ruling NPP was connected to 61% of these incidents, and the main opposition, the UDP, was linked to over 23%. I mean, it's pretty obvious this is a problem that starts right at the top. Things actually got so bad that the National Human Rights Commission had to step in. And they did something they almost never do. They publicly called out the leaders of both major parties. When your country's human rights watchdog has to issue a direct warning like that about language that could incite violence, you know the situation is serious, really serious. Okay, so if we're supposed to shift away from all this division, what should the conversation be about instead? Well, it's got to be about the economic issues that hit every single person's wallet. Let's start with two of the absolute biggest, the cost of living and that massive national debt. All right, first up, the cost of living. You know, you might hear official reports about positive economic growth, but for the average person on the street, that just doesn't line up with the daily struggle of trying to make ends meet. There's a huge disconnect. Let's break down why. And this right here, this really puts that struggle into perspective. An average civil servant, they're making about 10,000 dalasi a month, okay? But a single bag of rice, an absolute necessity, can cost up to 3,000 dalasi. Just think about that. Almost 1/3 of your entire monthly salary is gone on one bag of rice. And that's before you even think about paying for rent or transportation or your kids' school fees. It's just not sustainable. So this leads to the big question, the one every single voter should be asking. If the economy is supposedly growing by almost 6%, then where is all that growth going? Why isn't it showing up on our dinner tables? This is what accountability looks like. This is what an election focused on real issues is all about. Okay, the second huge economic crisis we need to talk about is the national debt. And please, don't think of this as just some boring number on a spreadsheet. Think of it like a heavy chain wrapped around the country's future. It limits the government's power to spend money on everything that actually matters. You know, things like better hospitals or good schools for our kids. And how big is this debt? Well, according to the IMF, it's hovering around 75% of the country's entire GDP. So, to put that simply, for every $4 the country produces, 3 of them are owed as debt. It means a massive chunk of the nation's money is just going to service loans instead of being invested back into building a better future for Gambians. So this is where we, the voters, have to demand real, concrete answers. No more vague promises.
The question for every single candidate has to be, what is your specific, detailed plan to manage this debt? Are you going to renegotiate loans? Are you planning to raise income tax or maybe expand the tax base? And how are you going to do any of that without crushing families who are already struggling?
You know, these economic problems we've been talking about, they aren't just abstract ideas. They have devastating, real-world consequences for people. So let's shift now and look at the human cost of all this inaction, focusing on two groups in particular, the country's youth and its farmers. Let's start with the youth. Young people are literally the future of the Gambia. They make up something like 60% of the entire population. But with so few opportunities at home, what happens? Far too many feel like they have no other choice but to risk everything, their very lives, on that dangerous backway journey to Europe. And just let this number sink in for a second. Over 41%, more than 4 out of every 10 young Gambians, are not in school, they're not employed, and they're not in any kind of training program. That is such a heartbreaking waste of potential for the entire country, and frankly, it's a recipe for some serious social frustration. And let's be clear, the research on this is undeniable. This isn't just bad luck or a coincidence. It's a direct result of bad governance. The lack of economic opportunity that comes from it is what's pushing young people to make this absolutely desperate journey. They're not being pulled, they're being pushed. So the question for our leaders has to be more than just showing up for a photo op at a new skills center. That's not enough. The real question is, what is your actual plan for creating real, sustainable jobs? How are you going to build an economy where young Gambians can actually see a future for themselves right here at home? And finally, let's talk about agriculture. This is the sector that should be the absolute backbone of the Gambia's economy. I mean, it employs almost half the entire workforce. And yet, it's been neglected, almost systematically, leaving farmers in this incredibly difficult, almost impossible situation. And the situation with groundnut farmers is just a perfect example of this neglect. For 3 years in a row, the government has kept the price they'll pay for groundnuts, a super important crop, exactly the same, frozen. But at the same time, the cost of everything farmers need, like fuel and fertilizer, has gone through the roof. They're trapped in this impossible economic squeeze, with their costs going up, but their income staying flat. So when you step back and look at all these huge, deep-seated problems, you have to ask, what's the way out? Well, it has to start with a massive shift in how we even talk about politics. And this is a change where everyone, citizens, the media, and yes, the politicians themselves, has a part to play. And this really boils it down to the choice the Gambia is facing. Are we going to stick with the old style of politics? You know, rallies that are all about clapping hate and fear-mongering? Or can we move to a new kind of politics, where rallies become a real battle of ideas, and the best plan for the country is what actually wins? Because at the end of the day, the Gambia's challenges are structural. They aren't about someone's personality or what tribe they belong to. They're about policy. They're about planning. So as we get closer to 2026, the single most important question we can ask anyone who wants our vote isn't, who are you or where are you from? The real question is, how will you solve these problems? Tell us the plan. Show us how, exactly, you're going to make life better for every single one of us.